Hi there, welcome to the 5th FarmED podcast. I'm Fiona Mountain. I'm standing in for John Brenier, who is currently away, normally hosts the chats for the podcast. I'm joined today by Tim Tasker and Anthony Carlisle, who are the two architects responsible for the wonderful buildings here at FarmED. So, Tim, can you tell me a little bit about the planning stages and how the concept of the buildings came about and what considerations you had to bring into play when you were designing the original concepts for the buildings?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fairly long journey. It was quite a sensitive site in the middle of the AONB, so there was a bit of toing and froing and negotiation with the planners. But we originally started with Ian and Celine and others in Cotswolds Seeds, including yourself, Fiona, right at the beginning when they didn't quite know what the site was going to be used for. Let alone what buildings might be on the site. And so, it was starting from basics and asking the big questions first about what the site was going to be used for and plotting out the different areas of the site, like the different planting areas, the waste, the water management, the plots. And then, sort of came to the conclusion that the middle part of the site, where the two different earth conditions joined and where the existing buildings were, was the best place.
So what were can you just explain for people who've not seen maybe what was here before? They were basically sort of very standard farm buildings, weren't they? Were an old house. Is that correct? Sort of an old 1950s house?
Exactly, yeah. Bungalow and another 1950s house. Bungalow was lived in, 1950s house was pretty dilapidated, and some old farm buildings around them.
So
the two best examples, yes.
Yeah.
And then the two best examples of those are still there. So we've retained the old Cotswold.
So it's two little people who obviously can't see this, but two lovely, very attractive little farm sheds, really, aren't they? That we look through over the valley that are still have been left in situ.
Yes, and then kind of worked in from starting with the landscape, worked into what these buildings might be. And through a lot of design and development and sort of concept analysis, really, came up with these 4 farm buildings. Two of which, one of which is finished, second of which is nearly there, and the third.
Can you describe what the 4 buildings are? What their sort of purpose is, and how they differ from each other?
Yeah, certainly. So farm building 1 that we're currently in at the moment, this is a lecture space, which also has a meeting room, an office, toilets, and a boot room. And this is the sort of the entry building where people come initially on the walkarounds, and it's an education building that's heated. Climatic terms, it's a kind of comfortable building to spend the time indoors in, as opposed to FarmED, as it's known now, which is more of a sort of flexible building that can accommodate a wide range of different uses. It also has the pizza oven in as well, but it's I think flexibility was the big thing in both buildings. The idea being that depending on which micro businesses or programs you had going on at a particular time, that you could divide them up quite easily. Both buildings it's a family of buildings that are designed around a grid, and that grid is very, very flexible in terms of how it can be used in the future.
And so that in the third building is a barn for farm machinery and that kind of thing, isn't it?
Yes, agricultural storage. Yeah, also storage of seed and a kind of store space for the micro businesses that hopefully be occupying farm building 2 in the future. So
can you tell me about the design of the building and the materials of use? How did you come up with the plan for that, and what considerations did you use?
I think sustainability was at the source of everything, really, and trying to make the buildings carbon neutral, and there's lots of different elements went into them, but the we start in the ground might be the easiest place to go, which is the hardest part always in building in terms of carbon. Main reason being that cement, or the Portland element of cement, is very unsustainable. So farm building 1 has got a beam and block arrangement, which practically speaking is quite sustainable because you can reuse the beams, you can reuse the blocks, so that embodied energy.
What that is? How does that? I'm not familiar with that term. So how does that work?
So arguably one of the most unsustainable things you can do is to have a big raft slab that just is cast on top of the ground.
Right.
Because that means that you have a large amount of cement, a large amount of reinforcement, and a large amount of compacted hardcore beneath it, all of which is requires a lot of carbon. So beam and block arrangements is when you build a trench footing around the perimeter of your building, and then in quite simple terms you span precast concrete beams between those trench footings, and then you insert blocks between them. And the idea being that there's different types of energy in building, but you've got the energy in use, so how much energy you take to heat a building, to heat the water, to heat spaces, and then so it's energy in use, extraction, all of the other sort of active elements of a building. But then there's also the embodied energy, which is equally important. And obviously, if something that can be recycled after a building's use means that the carbon is not thrown away, that you can sort of reuse that. So, the beam and block 4 arrangement is quite a good thing to do with concrete. The other thing that we've tried to do with the floor is to use the floor as a thermal mass to try and store some of the energy within it. So we've got south-facing aspects to the buildings, all glazed, with overhanging soffits, which allows the low summer sun in and the high summer sun out. And the idea being, together with the roof lights that run down both buildings, is to heat up that slab passively, that thermal mass, and then that heat slowly dissipates into the space.
So can you tell me about the materials that you've used as well?
Yeah, sorry. So if we start, so concrete in the floors, polished concrete slab in the floors, and then we've got a steel frame. Yeah. And that's bolted down to the slab, and that steel frame is the only real steel in the building, and the rest of it is timber. Obviously, timber is a great carbon store.
What timber is it? Can you tell us what?
Well, the rafters and the purlins and all of the elements that you don't see are pine off the shelter to build a tannalised pine.
The lovely wood that we do see. What's
that's
that?
larch, local larch. So internally and externally, the building is clad with larch.
And why did what was the thinking behind the use of larch?
So larch is great because it's quite stable material that can be used externally and internally, and it's quite economical when judged against hardwoods that are used a lot for external cladding, but is also sustainable given that it's grown locally. And obviously timber is the best thing we can use for building. A tree grows for all of its life, it absorbs all that carbon. When it's come to the end of its life and it's finished absorbing carbon, it's cut down and used as a building material, and it's a carbon store.
And it goes? It's already going on one end of it, a lovely sort of silvery colour. Is that what happens to larch? Is that what was that part of the design? Yeah.
So over time, the external skin will go a grey colour, and then the idea is that that's contrasted with the pinky effect that we get internally, and so you have this really nice contrast between outside and in.
And the roof. Tell me about the roof. What's that made of?
So the roof is all zinc. And zinc is a very good material from a sustainability point of view because it's sort of 95% recycled zinc. It's also self-healing, and it lasts an incredibly large amount of time with a good recycled content. And the roofs, obviously, with zinc can go down to a very small pitch, so you can go right down to 5 degrees with zinc. as opposed to natural slate where you're kind of limited to 17, 18 feet.
So Anne, maybe could you tell us how you made sure that the buildings fit into the beautiful Cotswolds? Because we're looking over the Evenlode Valley today, aren't we? A lovely sunny day. Can you sort of explain how you made sure that the buildings were, obviously we're in a conservation area here, which was a big consideration. So could you explain what how to take that into account?
Later on.
Right.
So that's really Tim's doing, but
Okay.
what I will say...
Any old excuse, Sam.
No, not at all. I can say that the cleverness of it is that, like you just say, we're looking at a fantastic valley, and we're quite high up on the hill, which means that it gets also really windy. I think in Yorkshire they call these courtyards a fold yard.
They do, yeah.
And it's a really traditional arrangement, which means that when you're outside you can be in the sheltered courtyard, but when we're in here you can see the fantastic view.
Okay, yeah. That makes sense.
I think that's a really good point. The concept of the farmyard and the courtyard, creating a sheltered space from the prevailing wind, and that relationship with the old historic Cotswold farms was a real strong concept from this.
Was it? Yeah, because actually the arrangement of the buildings does feel very. The buildings themselves have quite a modern feel to them. The actual arrangement feels very traditional. Was that's sort of something you wanted to do? Yeah.
You get little glimpses of the valley when you come in.
You do, yeah.
But when you park your car, you can see where you are, see the view.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So what's your first impressions on sort of coming back then to see it actually sort of taking shape from the plans you had on paper?
I think really excited about it. It's looking really, really good, and I think it's a building that is part of its landscape, and obviously the landscape's not quite sort of there yet. But
it's early spring yet, isn't it?
Yeah, I think when when everything starts to bloom, it's going to really sing. But the concept of it is working really well. The rainwater harvesting is proving very good. The heat gain and heat loss is really working well. I know Ian's had this working in the end of the summer as well, and it was performing well there. So. Yeah, I think it's really exciting, and I think the test will be how the buildings can accommodate these future requirements of different farming businesses that turn up as and when they do.
Excellent. So, and what's your role been then? Have you been involved in the whole development of FarmED?
I think I started working when it was already in. Well, you were speaking with the planners, weren't you?
Yes.
You were quite a long way down the conversation with the planners.
Yes.
So mostly it's been just helping Tim. Well, I've been helping Tim basically.
Okay.
That's so the history is me and Anne grew up together.
Oh, okay.
We studied together. We've done lots of things together, and we both kind of have the same opinions and passions on architecture in general. And so the Ant came at planning stage, and we were talking a lot about massing then with the planners. The planners, their sort of go-to aesthetic is a Cotswold house.
Yeah.
And so we had to really work with them to try and bring them on board with the buildings that we have here. With asymmetric roofs, and although we've got Cotswold stone elements, it was quite a foreign thing to do for them. But when you turned up, Ant, we've changed. If you notice, each building, the roofscape is in 3 different parts. We've got a flat roof section, the entrances, then this is pitched on this side on both buildings, and this the eastern side of the buildings have got a partial flat roof with pitched sides, and that was all part of breaking down the massing, which I remember you doing the early massing models with the planners.
Seems well.
And what have you been doing here today? You've obviously come back to have a look round and talk to Ian. So what's been the purpose of your visit today?
Purpose today? Well, we started the day, we were talking about the internal cladding to Farm Building 2, where we're going for a slightly different approach here.
So what are you doing in Farm Building 2 as far as the internal cladding goes? Are we having larch again, or are we having something different?
So it's going to be timber.
Okay.
And the big, so farm building 1, we've got lots of beautiful 25mm by 50mm strips of larch that line the building and give it a really good acoustic performance, and also provide this sort of pink texture. So farm build FB1 is not such a big requirement to have the kind of acoustic performance. It also is quite costly because of the labour involved in fixing everything. So we're going to keep that pinkiness and go for standard WBP ply, I think.
Okay.
Sort of configured nicely within the grid of the building and the steel grid.
Excellent. So you'll come back and have a look at that and what's the timescale for that then? Are we starting that soon or?
Well, I think Ian's got some samples turning up of various different options, and because it needs a sort of fire rating.
Okay.
A Class O fire rating finish to it,
Okay.
to see what the effect of that is, and then go on from there. So that was one of the issues. We talked about the cladding for the new farm FB3 building, and also some other bits and bobs with the new offices that are going to be in the Hay Park.
Yeah.
So so it's kind of nice to be dealing with these issues of detail, having started from a point of of addressing the sort of macro questions and working through with Ian and Celine, what they wanted to get out of it.
I know that Tim said the same thing, but the overall atmosphere of the project comes from the client, and Ian and Celine, like they're just doing the right thing at every step, haven't they? They're just like something Tim told me right at the very beginning, that Ian and Celine have.
They had a vision for it, didn't they?
Absolutely. And it's just kind of working through that and bringing that out. And absolutely. And there's a lot of not only the way the building's arranged, but the way they're constructed. Right from the sheep's wool insulation that is in all of the buildings.
Yes.
That came straight from them. It was a quite important thing for them. So the whole
sustainability side of things.
The honesty of construction and right through to the kind of concept has been
Ian and Celine's vision.
For a large part of it.
Well, thanks so much for joining us. Really, really great to talk to you. And join us soon for episode 6.
Splendid.
Thanks, guys. That's brilliant. Thanks for that.
No, not at all. Very good to see you.